When I was 30, I was super into hiking and being bold. I spent a month every year wandering around and adventuring in the deep woods. One time on a sunny day, I found an abandoned house halfway up the mountain, tucked away in those dense woods. I was secretly happy and excited, thinking there must be something fun inside. The door was half open and creaking. Standing in the doorway, I could smell a strong, musty odor, a stark contrast to the fresh forest air around me. The wooden floor creaked slightly, as if telling of the vicissitudes of time. Going inside, the room was full of all kinds of used items. A rocking chair that was almost falling apart was quietly placed in the corner, feeling like it was waiting for a long-lost owner. Scattered on the table were a few yellowed newspapers, the writing on them already blurred, hiding a bunch of clues to a terrible story. There was some broken china lying around the house, shards all over the floor, and I could sense the man's anger from the shards on the floor. The photos on the bedside table were blurred by age, and it was hard to see the expressions of the characters, filling the room with an eerie atmosphere. At this point, I began to feel an inexplicable sense of depression, feeling that in this forgotten place once happened a very tragic story. Perhaps someone had fought and wrestled here, and every obsolete object told the silent truth. In the dimly lit corner, I thought I heard a faint whisper that echoed through the air along with the wind. I stopped and pricked up my ears, trying to catch more of the sound, only to be met with a terrible silence. These whispers might just be the sound of the wind blowing the leaves outside the house, but the house was hallucinating me into talking. I was mentally normal, yet I would have hallucinations in this house. This house was evil. I walked through every corner with fear and trepidation, turning back from time to time, feeling as if there was something waiting for me in the darkness at any time. Suddenly, I realized that there was a door leading to the basement in one of the corners. The door was rusty. I hesitated for a moment and finally opened it. I slowly walked down the stairs and touched the light switch and pressed it. The basement lights didn't come on. There was no power. I turned on the flashlight. The air in the basement was colder. A suffocating feeling pervaded it. The dim flashlight illuminated a mess of papers on an old-fashioned table, which, though seemingly unobtrusive, formed an incredible picture in my mind. It wasn't a huge basement, but the dim space was creepy, the light reflecting off the old stone walls and the piles of rusty chains on the floor. In that dark corner, I suddenly saw a large black stain on the floor that looked like blood that had dried and weathered for a long time, as well as long knife scratches left on the wall. Damn. Someone must have wielded a knife here. There were also messy footprints on the floor, as if I had seen a bloody fight happening here. I could feel the thick rust and dead silence in the air, and a chill ran through my entire body. In another corner, I also found a worn-out chest, which I hurriedly opened, emitting an odor of decay and blood. I couldn't believe it when I saw a pile of rotting clothes piled up in the chest, and in the middle of it, a rusty knife was lying there silently. What had happened here? My heart was beating wildly. Looking at this mutilated scene, my mind couldn't help but conjure up gruesome images of murderous struggles. Perhaps this abandoned house, buried deep in years, had once witnessed an unspeakable thrill. I left in a hurry, but felt as if there were invisible eyes watching behind me, and this horrifying experience stayed in my mind for many years and could not be forgotten. Every time I think of it, I can't help but feel a shiver in my heart. As the morning light filtered through the clouds and spilled out onto the ocean, Adam packed up briefly and hurriedly before rowing his small boat towards the isolated island, his heart pounding with worry for his sister. The purpose of his move was to find his sister, Alice. Alice had worked at this mental hospital 15 years ago as a doctor, but 6 months ago, Alice suddenly lost contact. Adam had called the police to report Alice missing, but there had been no news from the police side so far, and Adam could only try to find Alice by all means. Adam remembered that once Alice overheard him telling him that she was going to make a trip to this mental hospital, which had been abandoned for 10 years. The hospital had been abandoned after an accident 10 years ago, and Adam always had the feeling that Alice still had some unspoken secrets there. Adam wanted to make a run for it, and maybe find out a little more about Alice's whereabouts. Adam rowed his boat ashore and stepped carefully onto the island that time had abandoned. He followed paths through the jungle to the abandoned 3-story asylum. The isolated island was currently uninhabited by only one abandoned mental hospital. Adam pushed open the large, rusty iron gate, the clanging and banging sound laced with a kind of vicissitude. The yard was dilapidated and desolate, overgrown with weeds. The graffiti on the walls was blurred. The ground was covered with a thick layer of black ash, covered with disorganized footprints. Obviously, people at that time pushed and shoved each other, panicked and fled strings. Musty smells and dead silence filled the rooms crippled by the fire, as if the building still held countless deaths and wails. In one room, Adam found some documents about the asylum. It had once been an experimental medical facility for the treatment of unfathomable mental illnesses and supernatural oddities that happened to the patients. The documents mentioned that the patients often suddenly descended into madness en masse at night, leaving the doctors helpless. A chill rose in Adam's heart, and he decided to walk through the rooms, searching for signs of Alice. Walking into one of the wards, Adam felt an indescribable dreariness in the air. In the corner of the room was a broken iron bed with a broken and dirty Muppet standing on it with eyes that kept watching him. Adam saw a void in the eyes of that rag doll. A chill swept over his body and he felt dizzy for an instant. It was really evil. On the walls of the room, there were red graffiti and symbols that must have been left by the patient during the attack. Adam felt an eerie atmosphere, and the howls of the sick people in the night rang in his ears. Suddenly, his sister Alice's shrieking voice rang throughout the ward, interspersed with the simultaneous howls and cries of numerous patients, and Adam was in a trance. He looked around the room and realized that the room's bed was gone, and the entire room was twisting and swirling. His sister's cries of panic and fear became clearer and clearer, and Adam was thrown into an uncontrollable panic, not knowing where he was at once. Adam hastily slapped himself hard twice to clear his head while he still had some sanity left. Adam stepped into the next room, which was supposed to be a treatment room, as the tables and stools in the room looked old and messy. The 2 beds were piled high with tattered shackles and rusty handcuffs. Adam could imagine seeing the days when frenzied, manic patients were out of control, and the doctors were forcing their patients onto the beds, cuffing them and doing everything they could to deal with them in an attempt to calm those frenzied minds. In one corner of the room, he found an ancient electroshock therapy device and an abandoned operating table. It reinforced his belief that medical experiments and experimental treatments had once taken place here, and that the doctors were probably trying to explore the depths of the human mind, only to fall into an irreparable situation. Adam gazed at the rusted tools and couldn't help but see in his mind's eye how the doctors had carried out cruel experiments on their patients, trying to find a way to control them. Unease filled his mind, and he felt increasingly suspicious of the medical experiments taking place in this forgotten sick house. Suddenly, he felt something move behind him. He looked back and realized that the old shackles on one of the beds were making a faint rattling sound, as if invisible hands were rattling them. Adam's heart raced, and an ominous feeling filled the air. There were old paper file books scattered on the table, and the doctors' descriptions of their patients were full of unimaginable verbiage. Some patients seemed to see invisible ghosts coming to claim their lives at the onset of their illnesses, while others fought their nightmares and hallucinations. It all gave Adam an inexplicable sense of suffocation, as if the sufferings of the sick still lingered in the crumbling building. As he delved deeper, he heard faint voices coming from one of the rooms. Pushing open the door to the room, he saw a blurry figure sitting in the corner, letting out low sobs. The figure looked familiar, but in the darkened room, he couldn't make out who it was. Adam! A faint voice came, like Alice's. His heart beat more violently as he gradually walked towards the figure sitting in the darkness. Just as he touched the figure, a chill came over him, and Adam saw an empty corner with no one in it. Adam felt a wave of vertigo as he realized there was a piece of paper on the bed with red and black writing. "This is no longer our home." It seemed to be written in blood. In the midst of this chaos, his sister's voice rang out again with an unspeakable sadness. "Go, Adam, get out of here." Bewildered, he met the voice, trying to find any trace of Alice. Adam couldn't make sense of it all as his sister's voice faded away, replaced by a deep silence in the room. He rushed back into the hallway and sprinted for the stairs, trying to clear his mind and trying to find an exit. He realized that the entire asylum seemed to be laughing at him, the screams of the doctors and the wails of the patients echoing through the empty corridors. He felt like he was the only survivor who had been able to escape from here that year. He panicked and ran back to the boat, rowing desperately to get away from the island. Looking at the abandoned asylum looming in the mist, Adam realized that the shadows of the island would forever leave a deep mark on his heart. Last summer vacation, my good friend Richard and I were really bored, and we had a sudden idea to go to an abandoned slaughterhouse in our town to record some videos and send them to our friends to show our courage. When it was almost dark, we drove to the gate of the slaughterhouse, which was not too big, and there were 3 buildings, but I couldn't tell which one was the workshop, which one was the cold storage, and which one was the temporary storage. We circled around outside and saw that one door was hidden, so we pulled the door open and went in. It was a haunted house. The house was larger than expected, the ceiling was higher than my house, and there were some fuzzy bloodstains along the gutter grooves to the left of the entry door. There was also some broken stuff still hanging from the iron hooks of the butchering rack, and the feeling was, super uncomfortable. This room is supposed to be the slaughtering workshop. My shoes stepped on the debris on the floor and made a clicking sound, and my heart tightened for a moment. I instantly regretted that I had overestimated my guts before. We entered a room on the left, unlit and somewhat dimly lit. I took out my cell phone and turned on the flashlight, and for a split second, it simply scared the piss out of me. Across the corner stacked some worn-out chainsaws for cutting meat, rusty blades, workbenches stained with stale blood, and the smell of blood still hung in the air. The desk next to the door was littered with disorganized papers with strange symbols and numbers drawn on them. I casually picked up a piece of paper, and I was confused by what was written on it. There was a strange thud sound in the room. Inexplicably, a cold wind blew. My hand shook. The phone fell to the ground. The flashlight light was covered by the phone. Could not illuminate the room. The room dimmed down. Suddenly I felt something in the corner of the wall, but could not see. I quickly picked up the phone. Re-illumination of the house. The ceiling was covered with cobwebs. And then to the corner of the wall, I saw 3 big fat rat saws panicking and fleeing, dragging a long tail, eyes thieving. Suddenly there was a bam from behind us. We turned around and saw that a board leaning against an old table had fallen to the ground, scaring me and my buddy so much that we screamed and ran out of the room without thinking about it, feeling something chasing after us. We ran like madmen. Our shoes on the ground. Debris made a sound, accompanied by our rapid breathing and screams. The whole quiet slaughterhouse of the sudden boiling, horrible finale. In our panic, we were able to find a way out of the hellhole and ran down the path where we had parked our car. We stopped, gasping for breath. It was so scary to look back at the abandoned slaughterhouse. We sat in the car, not saying a word, and just felt a little chill on our backs still. The 2 of us were so scared that we couldn't speak for at least a minute. Suddenly, Richard snapped, "Do the souls of these pigs and cows stay here after they're slaughtered?" My buddy looked at me with wide eyes, as if pondering the question. I smiled and replied, "Dude, we just scared ourselves earlier, didn't we?" He frowned, not quite believing it. I really felt something chasing us just now, and that sudden noise sounded so real. Don't you think this place is a little spooky? Richard seemed to be trying to put his mind at rest, but remained on guard. I snapped, "Maybe we can go back and look up the history of this slaughterhouse and see if there are any legends. Maybe there really are some stories we don't know." He nodded. "That's right too, brother. When we get back, let's check and see if anyone has had a similar experience." As the car traveled home, we began discussing how to find out the history of this abandoned slaughterhouse. The conversation was somewhat joking, but still revealed disbelief and curiosity about what we had just experienced. Perhaps this abandoned place really does have some stories waiting to be uncovered.